You're sitting at your desk. Everything is fine. The world is not on fire. Nobody is threatening you. You have food, shelter, a working internet connection, all the benchmarks of a pretty decent life. And then it happens. The person next to you starts chewing. Not loudly, not obnoxiously, just chewing. The way every human being who has ever eaten a meal has chewed since the dawn of the species. And something inside you, something ancient and irrational and deeply, embarrassingly personal, begins to crack. Your jaw tightens, your eye twitches. A very specific kind of rage starts pooling somewhere behind your sternum, and you are fully aware that this is insane, that this person has done nothing wrong, that you are a reasonable adult living in a civilized society, and none of that information helps even slightly. That feeling, that particular flavor of disproportionate white-hot irritation at something completely harmless, that is what this video is about. And the answer to why it happens is stranger, more fascinating, and honestly a little embarrassing than you'd expect. So here's the question, stripped down to its bones. Why do small, harmless, objectively insignificant things make us lose our minds? The short answer is, your brain is lying to you. The long answer is what this whole video is about. Here is something your brain does every single second of your waking life, and almost certainly your sleeping life too, that you are completely unaware of. It predicts, not in a vague, horoscope kind of way, in a relentlessly specific, constantly updating, computationally expensive kind of way. Neuroscientists call it predictive processing, and the basic idea developed in its modern form largely through the work of Carl Friston at University College London in the early 2000s is that your brain is not passively receiving the world. It is actively generating a model of what the world is about to do, and then comparing that model against incoming sensory data, and then updating, and then predicting again in an endless loop that runs from the moment you wake up to the moment you lose consciousness. When the prediction matches reality, your brain barely registers it. That's the whole point. Accurate predictions are boring, and boring is efficient, and efficient is what keeps you alive. You don't need to consciously process every footstep you take down a familiar hallway. Your brain already knows what's there. It predicted it. Check. Move on. But when the prediction fails, when something doesn't match the model, your brain fires a signal, a mismatch signal, an alert. And that alert has a particular texture. It feels urgent, it demands attention, and depending on the context, it can feel deeply, viscerally wrong. Now here's the key thing. The mismatch signal doesn't scale neatly with importance. It scales with surprise. And surprise is not the same thing as danger. A fork dropped on a tile floor at a quiet dinner table will spike your nervous system harder than a car alarm you've been ignoring for 20 minutes. Not because the fork is more dangerous, because the fork was unpredicted, and that is the first piece of the puzzle. The tiny things that drive you crazy are almost never genuinely threatening, but they are almost always unpredicted. They interrupt the model, they arrive out of nowhere, a pen clicking in an otherwise silent room, a notification sound at the wrong moment, a hair on your tongue that you cannot for the life of you locate. And your brain, the relentless prediction machine, treats every failed prediction with the same basic urgency, regardless of the stakes. That is not a malfunction. That is the system working exactly as designed. It's just designed for a world that no longer exists. Here is what your ancestors' average Tuesday looked like, roughly speaking, for about 200,000 years before anyone invented offices or open-plan workspaces or podcasts playing through someone else's earbuds at 7 a.m. You woke up, you were outside, or very nearly outside. The sounds around you were almost entirely natural wind, water, animal calls, the movement of other humans in your group, fire, crackling. These sounds were not random, they were informative. Every unusual sound in that environment was, statistically speaking, worth paying attention to. A branch snapping in the undergrowth behind you was not annoying background noise. It was data, possibly very important data. Your auditory system, the part of your brain that processes sound and assigns it emotional weight, was calibrated for that world. It evolved to be exquisitely sensitive to irregularity, to sounds that didn't fit the expected pattern, to repetition without resolution. Because in the ancestral environment, Repetition without resolution, the same sound, again, 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 from no visible source, was often a sign that something was wrong. Now drop that same auditory system into a 2025 open plan office. Suddenly, the world is full of irregular, repetitive, patternless noise that carries zero survival information. A keyboard that isn't yours. A phone vibrating against a desk. Someone in the corner sniffing every 45 seconds. None of it matters. None of it is a predator. But your brain's threat detection architecture doesn't know that. Not at the gut level. Because that architecture hasn't meaningfully updated since the Pleistocene. Researchers at the University of Groningen published a study in 2019 looking at what they called irrelevant sound effect, the measurable cognitive disruption caused by background sounds that carry no informational value for the task at hand. What they found was that the disruption was not uniform. Sounds with changing patterns, variable pitch, variable rhythm caused significantly more cognitive interference than steady-state noise, even when measured at identical volume levels. Your brain doesn't hate loud. Your brain hates unpredictable. And here is the gut punch part of this. The colleague who drums their fingers on the desk isn't doing it to you. They're not even aware they're doing it most of the time. They're self-soothing. A totally unconscious, deeply human behavior. The finger drumming is releasing a tiny, pleasant trickle of proprioceptive feedback for them. It feels like nothing. It costs them nothing. And it is slowly dismantling your capacity for rational thought from across the room. That asymmetry, one person's casual comfort becoming another person's invisible torment, is one of the stranger features of being a social species. We share space. We do not share nervous systems. There is a category of tiny irritations that is slightly different from sensory disruption, and it's worth separating them out because they reveal something else entirely about the human animal. These are the irritations caused not by unexpected stimuli, but by violations of expected order. The shopping cart left 3 feet from the cart return bay, not in it. The cabinet door left 2 centimeters open. The object on the shelf that is not where it belongs. The email that begins, per my last email, when you just know what that means. The reply all, to the reply all, the word irregardless. These things share almost no sensory quality with each other. What they share is a conceptual property. They are wrong, in a way that required almost zero additional effort to make right. And whoever left them wrong either didn't notice or didn't care. And that second part, the didn't care, is where the irritation lives. Humans are, at their evolutionary core, a deeply cooperative species. We survived not because we were the fastest or the strongest or the best camouflaged, but because we were extraordinarily good at coordinating with each other, at building and maintaining shared norms, at recognizing, very quickly, who was contributing to the group and who was freeloading. Robin Dunbar, the British anthropologist whose work on social brain theory has become one of the foundational frameworks for understanding human group behavior, has argued for decades that a huge portion of human cognitive capacity and a huge portion of our social anxiety is devoted to tracking social reciprocity. Who owes whom? Who is doing their share? Who is pulling the cart back 2 extra feet and who is leaving it in the middle of the parking lot like an animal? The shopping cart thing, famously, has been called a genuine test of moral character by more than one philosopher of ethics, not entirely as a joke. You are not required to return it. Nobody will punish you if you don't. You will suffer no social consequence in the moment. The only reason to return it is because it is the correct thing to do, and you know it, and society functions better when everyone does it. When someone doesn't, you feel it, not as a major injustice, as a specific, petty, maddening little signal that this person is not playing by the rules so obvious they were never written down, and that the fabric of cooperative civilization is fraying, one abandoned cart at a time. That is not an overreaction. That is your social brain doing exactly what it was built for. It's just aimed at a shopping cart instead of a member of your tribe who's been stealing meat. For most people, the sounds other people make are annoying in a general, manageable, background noise kind of way. For a significant and consistently underestimated portion of the population, they are something else entirely. Misophonia, literally hatred of sound, is a condition first formally described in the literature by audiologists Powell and Margaret Jastroboff in 2001, though people who have it have obviously been suffering with it for as long as humans have been making sounds near each other. The core feature is a disproportionate, intense emotional and physiological response: rage, panic, disgust, an overwhelming need to flee, triggered by specific sounds, almost always sounds made by other people eating, breathing, or performing small, repetitive movements. Chewing, lip smacking, sniffling, pen clicking, knuckle cracking, swallowing. For someone with misophonia, these sounds do not land as irritating. They land as unbearable, as a kind of sonic violence that the rest of the room seems completely immune to, which adds a layer of profound isolation on top of the sensory torment. Because how do you explain to someone that the sound of them eating an apple is genuinely ruining your ability to function? A 2021 study out of Newcastle University, led by Dr. Sukhbinder Kumar, used fMRI imaging to look at what actually happens in the brains of people with misophonia when they hear their trigger sounds. What they found was striking. The anterior insular cortex, a region associated with the integration of emotional and physical sensation with empathy and with the felt sense of embodiment, showed dramatically abnormal activity and connectivity in misophonia sufferers compared to controls. The trigger sounds were literally activating a different network than they did in other brains. Not just more of the same, different. What this suggests, and this is important, is that misophonia is not an attitude problem. It's not sensitivity or weakness or a bad reaction to something trivial. It is a measurably distinct neurological response pattern, one that some brains have and others don't, and the people who have it are not choosing it. Let that sink in. The person at the table who looks like they want to leave their own body every time you eat soup might not be dramatic. They might just have a brain that is wired in a way that makes your soup genuinely, physically distressing to be near, which, when you think about it, is one of the more quietly devastating things about being a social primate trying to share meals with other social primates. There is one more piece of this that ties everything together, and it might be the most important one. Almost every tiny irritation that drives humans to the edge has one thing in common: beyond unpredictability, beyond social violation, beyond sensory sensitivity. It is not in your control. You cannot make the person stop chewing. Not really. Not without a social cost that feels disproportionate to the offense. You cannot fix the cabinet door without getting up, and getting up to fix a cabinet door that someone else left open is its own minor humiliation. You cannot reply all to tell everyone to stop reply alling, because you'd be adding to the reply all chain, and you're not a monster. The irritation and the helplessness arrive together, which is precisely what makes the package so explosive. Psychologists have a term for this: perceived loss of control. And decades of research, beginning with Martin Seligman's foundational work on learned helplessness in the late 1960s and extending through hundreds of subsequent studies, have shown consistently that the emotional damage from an aversive experience is not just a function of how bad the experience is. It's a function of how controllable it feels. Two people exposed to the exact same irritating noise respond very differently depending on whether they believe they could stop it if they wanted to. The person who knows they could ask the noisy neighbor to stop and chooses not to because it feels socially awkward suffers more than the person who simply doesn't care about the noise, and often more than if they just asked. The unasked request sits inside the irritation like a splinter, making it worse with every minute that passes. You are not just annoyed by the tapping. You are annoyed by the tapping, and by your own failure to say something, and by the fact that saying something feels like too much, and by the awareness that you are now internally narrating your own mild psychological crisis over someone's pen. That is the human condition, compressed into one very specific, very petty moment. And here, at the end of all this, is where it gets genuinely interesting. Because everything we've talked about, the prediction errors, the ancestral noise sensitivity, the social reciprocity tracking, the neurological misfire, the loss of control, none of it is a design flaw. Exactly. It's a collision. It's a brain that was built for one world, dropped into another, and doing its absolute level best to navigate the gap using tools that are 200,000 years old. Your irritation at small things is not pettiness. It is your ancient, overbuilt, wildly over-engineered threat detection system firing in a context it was never designed for, trying to protect you from dangers that no longer exist, In a world that keeps producing new and inventive ways to be slightly, specifically, infuriatingly wrong. That is not a character flaw. That is breathtaking. There's a campfire thought I keep coming back to at the end of videos like this one. Not a solution, just a reframe. Every time you feel that specific, wordless, white knuckle irritation at something your rational brain knows is completely trivial, the pen clicking, the cabinet ajar, the reply all, the chewing that feeling is your nervous system handing you a piece of very old mail, addressed to a version of you that needed it desperately. A version who lived in genuine uncertainty, in real noise, surrounded by actual stakes. The mail is misdelivered, but it was sent with good intentions. Maybe the practice, and I'm not saying this is easy, I'm saying it's interesting, is learning to notice the feeling without quite trusting it. To hold the irritation at arm's length long enough to ask, is this the world being wrong, or is this just my prediction model throwing a tantrum? Because sometimes the world really is being wrong. The person is genuinely being inconsiderate. The norm really was violated. The social signal really does need to be sent. And sometimes you're just a modern primate sitting in a chair, flooded with Pleistocene chemistry, absolutely furious at a sound that a stranger is making with their mouth. Both things are true, often at the same time. And the next time it happens, the next time you feel that white-hot, embarrassingly disproportionate surge at something completely harmless, I want you to remember this video. Remember the prediction machine. Remember the ancestral noise floor. Remember that somewhere, 200,000 years ago, a version of you sat by a fire and paid very close attention to every sound in the dark, and that version of you survived. And the fact that you're here at all is partly because that version of you didn't let things slide. You come from a long line of people who noticed. Here's the question I'll leave you with, and I'm genuinely curious what you think. If you could rewire one thing about the way your brain handles irritation, would you actually want to? Or is the sensitivity, the noticing, the slightly too muchness, is that part of what makes you, you? Tell me in the comments. I'll be there, trying very hard not to be irritated by anything.